Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're distilling the landmark IPBES Global Assessment Report. Look, if you want to understand the true state of our planet's biodiversity and what it actually means for our future, this is it. We're talking about a massive, unprecedented scientific undertaking here. Researchers analyzed over 15,000 scientific publications to give us the absolute best picture of our natural world to date. So, we're going to look at the undeniable facts, the sobering trends, and most importantly, the actionable pathways forward. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at nature's vital contributions. Then, we'll examine the unprecedented decline, break down the direct drivers of change, and finally, explore pathways to sustainable futures. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Nature's Vital Contributions, which is basically the critical infrastructure of human survival. You know, we often tend to think of ourselves as somehow separate from the natural world, right? But consider this number, 75%. That is the percentage of global food crop types that rely entirely, or at least in part, on animal pollination. So when we talk about biodiversity, we aren't just talking about saving some remote, unseen species. We are literally talking about the biological mechanisms that put food on our tables. To put that into perspective, everyday staples, fruits, veggies, and massive cash crops like coffee, cocoa, and almonds simply wouldn't survive without this ecosystem service. The folks harvesting these coffee beans are relying on a complex, completely invisible workforce of pollinators. If we lose that workforce, we don't just lose a cool species of bee or butterfly, we lose entire agricultural sectors and the millions of livelihoods they support. And it goes way beyond breakfast. Human health and climate stability are directly tied to nature. 2 billion people rely on wood fuel just to meet their primary energy needs, and an estimated 4 billion rely mostly on natural medicines for their healthcare. Actually, even in modern medicine, about 70% of cancer drugs are either natural or are synthetic products inspired by nature. And for our climate, marine and terrestrial ecosystems are the only sinks for our carbon emissions. They draw down a massive 5.6 gigatons of carbon every single year. That's roughly 60% of global human-made emissions. Nature is basically doing the heavy lifting to keep this planet habitable. Which leads us to a tougher reality. Section 2, the unprecedented decline, a system under immense pressure. What we're seeing here is a pretty dangerous illusion of progress. On one hand, agricultural crop production has jumped about threefold since 1970, and raw timber harvests are up by 45%. But these short-term gains are heavily borrowing against our future. We're actively degrading the sustainable, regulating contributions, things like soil health and pollinator diversity, that actually allow us to harvest anything in the first place. Out of 18 categories of nature's contributions assessed by the IPBES, 14 have sharply declined. So what's the fallout of all this? Well, this unsustainable extraction has brought an average of 25% of assessed plant and animal groups right to the brink. 1/4 of the species we've comprehensively studied are currently threatened. We're fundamentally altering biological communities all across the globe, and that leads to a profound loss of local species and ecosystem functions. Now, let this number really sink in. 1 million. Around 1 million species could completely disappear within decades unless we drastically pull back on human drivers. If we don't take immediate transformative action, that global rate of species extinction is just going to accelerate. To put that into historical context, the current extinction rate is already tens to hundreds of times higher than the average over the past 10 million years. We are witnessing a biological collapse that is literally unprecedented in human history. Let's ground those huge numbers in a specific place. Take coral reefs, for example. We've already lost about half of all live coral cover worldwide since the 1870s, and recently those losses have rapidly accelerated because climate change is compounding other destructive drivers. And hey, this isn't just about losing underwater beauty. Losing reefs and coastal habitats dramatically cuts down on coastal protection, meaning a direct increase in flood and hurricane risks for vulnerable coastal communities. So what exactly is causing all of this? Let's get into Section 3, Direct Drivers of Change, the underlying causes of the crisis. the report systematically ranks the 5 direct drivers of this change based on global impact. Number 1, changes in land and sea use, specifically agricultural expansion, which has had the biggest negative impact on land since 1970. Number 2 is the direct exploitation of organisms like logging, hunting, and fishing. In fact, in the oceans, fishing is the number 1 driver. Then we have climate change, pollution, and the invasion of alien species. And the scary part? They're all compounding. Climate change, for instance, makes the impacts of the other 4 significantly worse. You can really see this core conflict on land right here, our massive infrastructure growth. And the fact that urban areas have doubled since 1992, that's come directly at the expense of primary forests, wetlands, and grasslands. Over 1/3 of the entire terrestrial land surface is now being used for cropping or animal husbandry. We are rapidly paving over majestic natural spaces with sprawling human footprints. And the global footprint of our intervention is just staggering. 75% of the land surface, significantly altered. 66% of the ocean, experiencing increasing cumulative impacts. We've lost over 85% of all wetlands globally. And looking at pollution, marine plastic pollution has shot up tenfold since 1980, affecting 86% of marine turtles and nearly half of all seabirds and marine mammals. These ecological shifts are driven by massive underlying societal changes over just the past 50 years. The human population doubled, the global economy grew nearly 4-fold, and global trade expanded 10-fold. Okay. Take a breath. We aren't just here to catalog a disaster. Section 4, Pathways to Sustainable Futures, looking at actionable systemic solutions. To actually fix this problem, we've got to rewrite the rules of the system. The report hits the nail on the head here. Economic incentives have historically favored expanding economic activity and often environmental harm over conservation. We need to flip that script. That means ditching harmful subsidies in fisheries, agriculture, fossil fuels, and forestry. Sure, vested interests will push back, but policy reforms that address environmental harm offer an incredible opportunity to both conserve nature and provide long-term economic benefits, especially when we start treating nature's vital contributions like the irreplaceable assets they are. And we don't have to start from scratch to build real-world solutions. The evidence clearly shows that nature is declining significantly less rapidly on lands managed by indigenous peoples and local communities. Their deep generational knowledge of local ecosystems is practically a blueprint for sustainable land and sea management. Empowering these communities isn't just a nice-to-have, it's absolutely crucial on a global scale. Just think about this. At least 1/4 of the entire global land area is traditionally owned, managed, used, or occupied by indigenous peoples. Plus, these areas cover about 35% of all formally protected areas and 35% of all remaining terrestrial areas with very low human intervention. Recognizing their rights and traditional governance is a fundamental pathway to saving global biodiversity. I want to leave you with one final, provocative question to chew on. Our current trajectory is unsustainable, for sure, but it is not irreversible. We have the data, we know what's wrong, and we know exactly what needs to change. So how can we reshape our global economic incentives to value the survival of our planet's critical ecosystems over short-term extraction? Because, as the science unequivocally proves, our quality of life and, honestly, our very survival depends entirely on how we answer that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and let's use this knowledge to drive real change.